They say silence is golden. A comfortable, familiar blanket woven from the absence of sound. But what happens when that blanket is violently ripped away? When the everyday quiet of a sleepy suburban street is invaded by something unnatural. This is Maple Creek, a town built on sensible mortgages, well-tended lawns, and the resolute belief that nothing truly interesting ever happens here. It's the kind of place where the biggest scandal is a misplaced recycling bin, a sanctuary of the mundane. And yet, one late summer night, Maple Creek was chosen to become the unwitting stage for a symphony of the sinister, a biological blitzkrieg that would redefine the meaning of a noise complaint. Our story begins. As all good horror stories do, in absolute soul-crushing quiet, the residents of Sycamore Lane were drifting off. Mrs. Henderson, finally finishing her 7th crochet project, young Timmy Miller, convinced he could beat the final boss with his eyes closed. Mr. Peterson, perhaps dreaming of a truly exciting tax audit. They were safe in their bubbles of domestic tranquility. They had no idea that a highly specialized, covert operation, let's call it Operation Amphibious Apocalypse, was already underway. The perpetrator, if you can call a man with a bizarrely specific and arguably harmless fixation a perpetrator, was never identified. A shadow, a myth, a man who saw the world not as it was, but as it should be. Louder, stickier, and far more prone to spontaneous ecological drama. The Frogmaster, as the internet would later dub him, had a vision. And that vision involved 20,000 tropical tree frogs. Think about that number, 20,000. That's enough to fill a small, overly enthusiastic stadium. Enough to make a rainforest sound like a library. And these weren't just any frogs. These were the bright-eyed, suction-cupped, full-throated, volume-up-2-11 variety. Their ideal climate, humid, lush, and hundreds of miles away. Their current location, the manicured, slightly chilly lawns of Maple Creek, specifically Sycamore Lane. It was less of an introduction and more of an unwarranted biological dump. The logistics alone are enough to keep an obsessive-compulsive awake at night. 20,000 frogs, transported under the cover of a thick, unnatural fog that rolled in just after midnight. The Frogmaster's methods were meticulous, almost artistic. Custom-built, climate-controlled transport vehicles. A silent, perfectly choreographed distribution along every flower bed, every storm drain, every gutter of Sycamore Lane. It was a masterpiece of pointless, dramatic effort. It was all a build-up to one glorious, collective moment. The moment the first cage opened. There's a beautiful, terrible irony to it, isn't there? This quiet, predictable street was about to be deafened by the love songs of 20,000 displaced, horny amphibians. You can almost hear the Frogmaster chuckling from the dark, a deep, satisfied rumble of a man who finally got the world to listen to the real chorus of the night. The first sleepy-eyed resident to notice was elderly Mr. Henderson, not Mrs. Henderson, who was still entangled in her crochet thread, but Mr. Henderson, who had simply woken for a glass of water. He stepped onto his back porch, a beacon of sensible flannel pajamas in the moonlight, and saw the sheen. A subtle, wet gleam across his perfect zoysia grass. A shimmering, low-lying mobile surface that seemed to pulsate with a silent, expectant energy. He squinted, he blinked, he thought, perhaps, that he'd had one too many prune juices before bed. Then, the first collective exhalation was heard. A sound so bizarre, so alien to this temperate zone, it seemed to defy physics. Then, the curtain rose. Welcome to Maple Creek. The 20,000 frog chorus was now in session, and nobody was getting any sleep. 20,000 voices singing out of key. The noise was not merely loud. It was physical. It vibrated through the floorboards, rattled the windows, and hammered against the eardrums like a squadron of tiny, highly motivated percussionists. For the residents of Sycamore Lane, the initial shock gave way to a slow, creeping horror. This wasn't just a racket. It was an oral invasion. Imagine waking to the sound of nature fundamentally breaking the rules. These weren't the comforting chirps of crickets. This was the high-pitched, insistent mating call of a tropical species that shouldn't be within 1,000 miles of their azaleas. Then came the visual element. You see, when 20,000 animals, renowned for their incredible stickiness, are suddenly released, they don't just stay on the lawn. They seek out the highest, warmest, and most easily scaled surfaces. And in suburbia, that means one thing: houses. Mr. Henderson, recovering from his first shock, looked out his kitchen window and saw his pristine stucco, the envy of the block, transforming before his eyes. It was a mosaic of green, brown, and neon yellow. The sheer density of the amphibians clinging to the vertical surfaces created a grotesque, living wallpaper. They were everywhere. On the mailbox, adhering to the glass of the storm door, forming a dense, slick carpet on the porch swing. The dark humor of the situation began to set in for a bewildered few. It was like a biblical plague, meticulously planned by a very bored environmental artist. It was terrifying, sure, but also ridiculous. Young Timmy Miller, perhaps the only one on the street with the requisite emotional tools for this chaos, mistook it for a video game come to life. He opened his blinds to see what looked like the final, impossible level. Frog Tower Defense. He watched, mesmerized, as the tiny green hordes scaled the side of his garage, their little toe pads achieving adhesion that defied architectural standards. The problem wasn't just the noise, or the visual horror, or even the sheer, impossible quantity. It was the displacement. These frogs, disoriented and desperate for their native humidity, were seeking warmth and shelter wherever they could find it. That's how Mrs. Henderson found one. Not outside, but inside her perfectly organized pantry, perched atop a jar of artisanal marmalade. That's how Mr. Peterson discovered a dense cluster clinging to the warm coils of his Wi-Fi router. The silent, slick invasion had become intimate. The boundaries between the outside world and the sacred suburban interior had been utterly dissolved. The police arrived, of course, to patrol cars, headlights illuminating the truly bizarre spectacle of the frog chorus in full swing. But what do you do? Officer, there are 20,000 frogs blocking traffic and violating the noise ordinance. The dispatcher, when she finally took the call, simply asked if this was some kind of elaborate prank. It was, but the punchline was a biological nightmare. Within 2 hours, the entire street had the distinct, sticky scent of damp vegetation and panic, and the sound never stopped. It was a message delivered in high-decibel croaks. The quiet life is over. The Frogmaster had spoken, and Sycamore Lane would never, ever be truly silent again. They were eventually contained, removed. The cleanup was legendary, involving hazmat suits and industrial vacuums. But a mystery remains. Who was the Frogmaster? And why Sycamore Lane? The official report cites an isolated, extreme animal release. But the residents know the truth. They were chosen. They were made to listen. And every time the night is quiet now, every time a drop of rain hits a window, they listen for the return of the 20,000 frog chorus. Because once you've heard that kind of chaos, silence doesn't feel like gold anymore. It feels like a threat. 20,000 frogs. One inexplicable night. The official story is that it's over, but the quiet that followed feels far more dangerous than the chorus. The Frogmaster is still out there. Do you believe the official report? Or do you think the silence is just the start of the next act? Click subscribe to unlock the full investigation into Operation Amphibious Apocalypse. And tell us in the comments below, what's the most bizarre, unexplained sound you've ever heard in the dead of night?